Hey, happy, beautiful, amazing day. Dr. Bob Rakowski here out of Houston, Texas, April 21 of 2020. One of the amazing questions out there is, can we learn from other people's opinions, from different opinions? Or maybe does one size fit all? Should we try to fit everybody in the same box? Well, Sweden certainly isn't being fit in the same box. And let's see what we've learned so far. World reported COVID infections about 2.5 million. Almost every expert says that this number is way more than that because so many people get it and don't know they have it. The reported deaths, 171,000. Hadn't shown that for a few days because there is solid data and evidence, even in the US, that people are being encouraged, medical people, to call it a COVID death, even when COVID was not the cause of death. Right? Stage 4 cancer patient dies with COVID and suddenly it's a COVID death. That graph here, we see that every pandemic has risen and fallen. They actually want to flatten this curve. So look at the world. The US seems to have risen and fallen. The US has risen and fallen. Spain risen and fallen. Italy risen and fallen. That's where it's going to do everywhere. That's basically indisputable. When we look at the SARS pandemic, it rose and it fell. That was SARS-1. What's the difference between SARS-2? SARS-2, not as deadly, but seems to be more contagious. So let's look at the real numbers. We look at Sweden. They're a country of a little over 10 million people, 15,000 cases that are confirmed, 1,765 deaths. What's that death rate? About 0.0175%. Now, they're being blasted because Norway and Denmark and Finland, which are on severe lockdown, a country about half the population, has a lower death rate. But certainly population density matters. A lot of what's going on in Sweden is happening in Scotland. So if we go ahead and we take a look at New York, New York State has 242,000 cases, 13,000 deaths. What's the population of New York State? About 19.45 million. Now let's just go to New York City. 136,000 cases, 10,000 deaths. They have 75% of the deaths in one city. So we can see when there's population density, the death rate rises. And by the way, that's a lot higher than Sweden. Then we look at the US alone, 550,000 cases. Again, a big chunk of those coming from New York City, and a big chunk of the U.S. deaths, bunch of the U.S. deaths, about a fourth of the U.S. deaths coming from one U.S. state. So, population density matters. Now, this is an interesting graph. It compares the UK versus Sweden. And Sweden didn't have a lockdown, UK did. Notice that the graphs are very similar. Up until recently, the UK has had a falling off point about 3 weeks after lockdown. So if you quarantine people, it seems reasonable that you're going to stop the spread. But let's talk to the people of Sweden themselves. They were free to express their opinion. This is from Peter Wilhelmsson, a friend of mine in Sweden. Peter is, in his 60s. He's an author of 20 books. He's a healthcare provider. He's a humanitarian. He's a sharp character. And he's a champion for truth. But here's what they said when they surveyed Sweden. What was Sweden interested in? 87% of people said their top concern was job security. Then basically 76% said safety of healthcare workers was the next thing that's going to be important to them. And then their personal safety. So notice they put the healthcare workers above their personal safety. 90% reported that they were going the extra measure to not infect the elderly. Maybe the 10% that said they weren't doing that, maybe they just weren't exposed to very many elderly people. So when we look at US flu deaths, I showed this yesterday, an economist said, you know what, this is something really odd. Flu is very consistent year after year after year. Now we're getting flu deaths. They seem to be replaced by COVID deaths. So now let's look at the real numbers from the CDC, right? The National Centers for Health Statistics. Basically, over 97% of people over the age of 55 are dying from something else, not COVID. 97% of the deaths of people over 55 are not COVID related, and that's knowing that the COVID deaths are being embellished. Italy, by the way, when people died of COVID, more than 99% had something else going on in their body. I love this quote from a world-renowned economist. He says, can we figure out the COVID impact? He says, at the end of the year, take the projected deaths, which is very, very consistent, and then look at the actual deaths and subtract the two. You'll probably find the COVID number. Yesterday, I showed that worldwide, if you use that strategy, there's about 23,000 global COVID deaths. Now, every life is precious. I get that. But who's dying from COVID? People that have something else going on. So it should make sense that a one-size-fits-all philosophy doesn't fit, right? I mean, you can try to pounce a round peg into a square hole or a square peg into a round hole. That is not going to work. We can't pound people into a little box. So is there a right way or a wrong way? We only know if we try more than one way. So here's the real question. Should you be free to make decisions for you, your family, your health future, and your economic future? That is the real question. And I guess every one of us has to answer it for ourselves. Sweden said you should be free. Texas is having a plan to open up, and they've been moderately open, at least here in Houston. I know in Austin, they had protests on the Capitol saying, listen, this is ridiculous. Young, fit, healthy people who are not at risk of death should be able to mingle. With that said, I'm Dr. Bob Rakowski, absolutely knowing that we can all be happy, healthy, and successful.